Okay, Rohit, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, I'm really, really excited about this conversation because it's something that I've wanted to talk to you about for a couple years. Because I read the book Non-Obvious Megatrends: How to See What Others Miss and Predict the Future, and you've had several of these books that have been bestsellers, and I think over now 15 years or so.
Yeah, it's 10 years, and
10 years.
It's been a crazy journey because there's been a new edition of the book every year. But Non-Obvious Megatrends, the one you're talking about, is the 10th and final edition. So
10th
it's
and final
capstone of a decade-long series.
Oh, fantastic, man! And you have some new releases of books coming out soon. But let me just lead a little bit about some of your background for everybody. So you're a #1 Wall Street bestselling author at over seven books now, and widely considered one of the most entertaining and original speakers on disruption, trends, and marketing. And you previously spent 15 years as a marketing strategist at Ogilvy and Leo Burnett, and you teach marketing and storytelling as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. So welcome to the show today.
Thank you. And that's all correct. Yes.
So I think this is fun because I think talking about stories and storytelling, I think that's not just reserved for marketers. I think I'd love for people to get a better lens on what it means to tell great stories, because everybody that listens to this show is a leader. And would you think that it's important for leaders to be able to tell stories?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling is a sexy topic right now. And you're right, it does often get lumped into marketing. But really what storytelling is about for me, and the way I teach it, is it's about persuasion. And if you put it in that lens, any leader knows you have to be able to persuade people, whether it's the people who are on your team that you're leading towards something, or being persuasive when it comes to the conversations you need to have to secure budget, or to change a direction, or to develop a business strategy. I mean, persuasion is something we use all the time, and stories work for persuasion. And yes, I come at it from the world of marketing, where the best marketers are storytellers using persuasive stories to maybe sell something or to change somebody's perception or belief. But at the end of the day, in order to do that well, you have to understand the nature of great storytelling, but you also have to understand human behavior. And that's really what I spend a lot of time thinking about, researching, and writing about, which is, why do people act the way that they do? Why do they work the way that they do? And if we can understand that, and we understand how to tell stories, then we can be persuasive.
Do you? I know you're often called a futurist, or someone who can see around corners. And I'm wondering, though, some of the things you talk about are like here today, but why is it not obvious for people that the current present moment is actually what you're talking about, and you're pushing it forward, yes, a little bit in the future, but why do people disrespect the present moment of what's actually happening? And I don't mean the word disrespect, but I mean more about why is it not obvious to people?
Yeah, it's there's a couple of reasons why it doesn't tend to be obvious, and the first and biggest is we're just not paying attention. And it's easy to understand why. I mean, there's so much media out there. There's so many demands on our time. There's so many things that we could be doing that we end up focusing. And focusing in the business world, or for any leader, is always described as a great thing, right? I mean, you want to have focus. You don't want to be distracted. You don't want to have too many balls in the air, whatever the analogy is you want to use for that. Like, we say focused people are the ones who get stuff done. And the problem is, when you're focused, by definition, it means that you have tunnel vision. And tunnel vision in general is not seen as a good thing. So now you've got this conflict. Do you tunnel vision and focus and get your stuff done, or do you actually look more broadly and pay attention to what's happening in the world? And what I teach to people is this technique of being aware and observant of the things that no one else sees. And one of the big things that I talk about is you can train yourself to see what everyone else misses. So like, here's a perfect example of it, right? The famous story of the founding of Starbucks and Howard Schultz, who was in Milan at a trade show for the coffee industry, working for a coffee brand at the time. And he's walking down the street in Milan, and he sees all of these coffee shops where people are just sitting outside, talking, hanging out. And he has this idea of what he thinks in his mind is the third place, not home, not work, the third place. And he wonders to himself, why don't we have that in America? And he comes back and he starts that. He creates that. And that becomes Starbucks. And now imagine Howard Schultz, the same Howard Schultz, right, walking down the street 30 years later. But instead of looking at those cafes, he's on his phone getting that last email sent, or like checking his LinkedIn to see like who just connected with him. And he walks right past those same coffee shops, never sees them, never has the idea, and Starbucks never exists, right? Mm-hmm. Two scenarios, exactly same person. One time he's paying attention and he has a world-changing idea that leads to one of the most successful businesses over the next 30 years. In the other scenario, he's got his head down, he's focused, he got that email done, but he never had the concept for Starbucks, right? And that's what we do to ourselves every day. We walk past what could be a world-changing idea because we're super hyper-focused on like whatever the thing is that we're trying to get done.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I was reading. I've been doing some reading, not only getting ready here for your book, but I was reading some of the notes, the shareholder letters that were released by Bezos. Walter Isaacson just did a book on his on essentially the whole Amazon shareholder letters from way back when, and it was really interesting. There's one part is structure of unstructured decision making, and he refers to this in the shareholder letter is that decisions so we make unstructured decisions opposed to more quantifiable operating decisions. Amongst other gems, you will find in the paper excessive attention by management scientists to operating decisions may well cause organizations to pursue inappropriate courses of action more efficiently. And I thought they think because it's quantifiable. And so I think that there's this huge discipline of like quantifying things, but then there's the non-obvious trends that are happening that Bezos is pointing to that they want to take advantage of. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that quantified information versus unstructured information.
I think a lot of times when we see numbers and when we quantify something, we immediately assume that it's meaningful. And what that quote says to me is numbers can be bullshit, basically. And when I come from the world that I come from, which is, yes, marketing and advertising, but I spent a long time doing a lot of digital work. So digital advertising, digital marketing, websites. And we would have this analogy example we would use about website metrics that was so powerful. And it was a central metric that a lot of people look at, which is time on site. So like how much time did they spend on your website clicking around? And in general, it would make sense that the more time they spend on your site, the better. Except imagine you have a restaurant website and someone goes to that site because they're trying to find your phone number to call and make a reservation. And they click on the homepage, they can't find the phone number. They click on another page, they can't find the phone number. They click around to 3 different pages, they can't find the phone number. They spent 30 seconds on your site, which is a decent amount of time in the digital world. Doesn't sound like a lot of time, but 30 seconds on a website is a good time on site. But that was an unsuccessful interaction because they didn't find your phone number and they left and went to a different restaurant. And you just lost that customer because they couldn't find your phone number. Now, that's one example where, like, if you look at the numbers on a spreadsheet, you'll be like, wow, 30 seconds on site, that's great. But when you look at what somebody actually did, you're like, this is pitiful. We just lost that customer and they didn't come to our restaurant. So we need to understand why the numbers are the way they are and what they're actually measuring, instead of just assuming, okay, a bigger number is always better or more time on site in that case is always better. So from your point of view right now, from like an 80-20 perspective, what are the 20, because clearly there's a lot of fun actually reading this book. I don't, not all books are fun to read, but this is actually fun because you have it structured in such a way where there's like, you're really between storytelling and really looking at some of these trends. And I was kind of stuck on one. I pulled up the gendering section and I was reading through the gender and I thought, this is really, really interesting how it was a selfie generation just
a short decade ago, people taking selfies, and the adults are sitting there going, why would anybody take a selfie? But you trace that all the way to this really an identity focused culture right now, where there's like this kind of sacred kind of emphasis on each human being versus, kind of the macro crowd. And I'm just wondering, maybe you could talk to that, how you put that together, and how you recognize trends, and then how someone could take action on making that meaningful for them by noticing that.
It's a great example because when you think about the selfie, and anyone who's, a little bit older, which I think, you and me, I put both in that category, right? We didn't grow up with selfies.
Definitely me.
Yeah. And me too. When you didn't grow up with selfies, you look at these kids today with their selfies and you think, wow, how self-obsessed can you possibly be? And one of the things I started digging into was a phrase that more and more people were using amongst the media that was being consumed by the early 20-somethings, which was called selfie confidence. And when I heard that term, selfie confidence, as opposed to self-confidence, selfie confidence, this idea that taking the selfie in the place that you want to be, looking the way you want to look, is a way of giving yourself self-confidence. I'm like, well, logically, that makes sense. And of course, any 17-year-old, right? I mean, it's hard for me to remember what I was like at 17, right? But any 17-year-old is going through that journey of figuring out who they are and trying to give themselves self-confidence. And we as adults forget what it was like to be 17 and struggle with having more self-confidence. I mean, now most of us who are older, like, we're kind of at this place where if somebody says something mean to us, we're just like, you're wrong, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we can sort of stand up to that because we've built that self-confidence. Mm-hmm. But when you're 17, you're still discovering that, whether you're male or female. And so to me, thinking about selfies in that context allowed me to have more empathy for someone who's not like me. And ultimately, that's what leads to understanding, because I think a lot of times what happens in this world is we look at people who don't think the way we do, who don't agree with our politics or who don't agree with our beliefs, and we think they must be stupid. They must be looking at stupid things. They must be stupid people, and they're wrong. And when you start to look at what they are consuming or how they're thinking, you build your ability to have empathy for someone who doesn't agree with you. And I think that that is something that we are missing in the world. And in particular, I think leaders need to have that, because you're not going to have a team of people who always think exactly the way you do. And if you do, I would argue you probably don't have as effective of a team as you could if you brought in diverse perspectives.
What if you wanted to go against a trend?
So that's the nice thing about trends, right? They're not roadmaps for something you have to do. They are descriptions of a behavior that is accelerating. So anytime you have a behavior that's accelerating, you can either jump on the train and say, hey, this is something that matters to more people, or you can look at that and say, I'm going to go the opposite direction. And one of the things that I often talk about is, if you've ever been to, this is probably going to date me as well, because I don't even know if they have them anymore, but those old ice skating shows, you remember, like, where they used to have the Disney characters on ice, and I took my kids to those. So it's not like that old, right?
It's not that old.
Yeah. There's always that one character on the ice who is the clown, the one who falls down on purpose or runs into stuff or like flips over backwards accidentally, supposedly accidentally. And what you realize as you watch that is that person who's falling down on purpose and looking like they're totally uncoordinated actually has to be the best skater. They have to be the most coordinated in order to be able to do that on purpose and look like they're actually falling. And to some degree, I think that that is the same thing with trends. Like, when you break the trend, when you break the rule, you do it with intention, because everyone's going in one direction. And so you go the other direction. It's not like you're closing your ears and kind of singing la 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 to yourself and saying, well, this isn't happening, so I'm not doing it. No, it's intentional. If you're intentionally doing it because you say, oh, everybody's moving this direction, I'm going to go the opposite direction, that's great. If you're not paying attention to the trend because you just are afraid, or you don't want to get left behind, or something like that, then that's probably not so good.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at it from a leadership and also a parenting point of view. I know you have a couple small kids that were mentioned. I didn't mention in your biography, but we all listeners, most of the listeners are going to have kids of some sort, and so or nephews and nieces. And I think the important thing is, like, I laugh about the Selfie Confidence, because as much as I train my kids, and I literally train them to be, sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but names will never hurt me. Like, that was what I grew up with. Get over, this perception, this external perception of others of you. But the reality is, they might get that from me, but their actual day-to-day action is going to be with a phone. It's going to be on Instagram. They're going to be doing what their friends are doing, and so they're growing up with this selfie culture. So whether now I still might have I might have a countervailing intention, and hopefully my way and my wife's way will win. But I have a countervailing force on the other side, which is the trend. And it's really quite interesting because as an employer, I have a certain amount of influence with my kids, but it's certainly not immutable. And then I have a whole bunch of new workers coming in that are susceptible to external thoughts and opinions, and they're deeply swayed by others. And so how do I navigate that as a leader? And I'm asking that as a question out there, because I'm not sure I've got the right answer. I don't have an obvious, no pun intended, I don't have an obvious answer for that one.
Yeah, I think that part of it is just understanding generationally how people have grown up. And frankly, I am much more worried about somebody who's in their mid-20s right now than I am about the quote unquote kids today, like kids who are under 18. And the reason why is because, and I have kids who are under 18. And what I see in terms of how they navigate social media, how they use digital tools, the media that they watch, they have a ton of content telling them and teaching them really important lessons, such as don't have too much screen time. Set a screen time reminder for yourself so you don't spend too much time. Don't be mean online, because if you're mean online, you can never take it back. Don't be a bully. Report cyberbullying. We have zero tolerance for cyberbullying. Like all of that stuff is what kids are growing up with today. They're getting educated because we know the ill effects of cyberbullying. We know the negative effects of spending too much time on screen. And even with virtual learning, we're still finding ways to strike that balance. And schools are still saying, look, we don't want you on the screen that much, so we're going to actually have you on screen and then we're going to go off screen. And they're thinking about that sort of thing. Whereas somebody who's 25 today, when they were a teenager, they didn't have any of that. Yeah, nobody was teaching them how to avoid cyberbullying. Nobody was teaching them that when you post something online, it stays online forever. Like, they didn't get any of that education. There was no Disney Channel, PSAs explaining to them what was going to happen. And so they grew up with none of that. And now they're forced to kind of figure it out. And some of them have figured it out. And look, they're adults, right? When you're in their mid-20s, you're an adult. But because they never had that, we've now seen the emergence of this whole sort of adulting. Like, I'm adulting because I'm just figuring this out now because nobody ever taught me this stuff.
Because what's interesting, now that I think about it, I was like, why does a trend, I love, like, I'm an English major. Everybody gets shocked when I say that.
Me too.
Running an IT. Are you? Okay. Yeah. Running an IT security company. But, I was like, always feel like the oddball in conversations, because they don't know how you can be an entrepreneur and run a corporation and all this stuff within this security world and be an English major. It's like that has like some predetermined destiny. But it was funny. I was listening yesterday to a podcast with Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink. And Jordan almost died over the past 2 years. So he's kind of back, interviewing people again. And then Jocko was on, and I don't know do you know Jocko and Jordan?
Not personally, but
okay. So just a small backstory, and you'll find this pretty interesting. So Jocko is an ex-Navy SEAL, and he writes children's books, and he does corporate leadership and stuff like that. And Jordan he just writes about really personal empowerment and leadership with individuals. So really quite famous. And so they were both talking, and I found out that Jocko is an English major, and Jordan is. Has read, and as a professor, reads all the time. And they were talking about the impact of reading and digesting information. And I thought, this is why the trend isn't necessarily what it's the aha moment I find of reading your book. I'm like, that's why this is significant, because you've pieced together a series of incidents which now give me a starting point where I can launch kind of an opinion from, I can launch a thesis from. And that was what I found was really, really interesting. I'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah, I do reference my English major quite often. And the way that I do it is, I mean, what you're describing is it sort of trains you on how to think about and how to extrapolate these ideas from something that maybe isn't quite saying it directly, right? I mean, when you do, because I've done a master's degree in English, and when you do that, you're reading a lot of comparative literature from people who are trying really hard to use as big words as possible.
Right.
Very specific type of, of reading. But at the end of the day, what you get, I believe, from an English major is you learn how to communicate. And in particular, you learn how to communicate through the written word. And while many of us don't describe ourselves as writers, when we're posting on social media, we're writing. When we're sending emails, we're writing. When we're sending text messages, we're writing. And the culture of the world has shifted towards writing. If you think about your work today, anybody who's listening versus your work 50 years ago, you have to write more than you had to back then. I mean, sure, there were inter-office memos and you could dictate them to a secretary or whatever.
Right.
But now we're constantly expressing ourselves through the written word. And so there's a reason why I think this club of people who were English majors and who are English majors are set up for success in business. Because it used to be, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that if you did an English major, it was because you wanted to be a professor of English.
Right.
And now there are so many people who graduate with English majors, and what that signals to the world is, hey, this person knows how to communicate.
Yeah, and I think it goes also dovetails with philosophy, and just really I think there's quite a bit to learn from dissecting and making complexity, distilling complexity into something that human beings can understand. And certainly, and I find myself every day looking at legal documents, looking at obscure IT security and how you translate technical into something that somebody can make a decision on, looking at a wide variety of thought and opinion and giving critical thinking to it. And that comes to, I think, your point here, I made note of, is speed reading doesn't work. Why speed reading doesn't work. And we originally started our conversation about kind of having discriminative thought. How do you teach leaders to do that? We're a fast world. So how do you teach leaders to have discriminative thought?
I think speed reading doesn't work for the same reason that you can't go to a hot dog eating competition and expect to be full and feel good afterwards. Because it's focused on volume, it's focused on quantity and not on understanding. And so the quote that I often share is an Isaac Asimov quote, where he described himself not as a speed reader, but as a speed understander. And that's my aspiration. That's what I try and teach to people. How do you become a speed understander instead of a speed reader? And what does that mean? And to me, what it means is you are paying attention to what matters, but you're also finally training yourself to ignore what doesn't. And that is a very valuable skill to have today in the media culture that we've got, because there's a lot of irrelevant stuff that gets shared and that gets posted.
What to say no to.
What to say no to. Yeah. And there's some tricks there's some shorthand that I've developed, right? So one of the shorthand is anytime you have a media, and this is a free tip for everybody, anytime you see a headline for a story that starts with the name of someone and the entire story is about what that person said, that is a waste of your time to read. Because it's basically opinion about someone who is usually insignificant, the host of a cable news TV show saying something inflammatory in order to get media that is then reported on and becomes media. And that is a waste of everyone's time. And it does not matter if you are politically oriented one direction or another. If all of the headlines you're reading is about he said, she said, that is a complete waste of time. So that is one form of media, one form of story that you should always avoid. There's never anything useful that comes from that.
So a news anchor saying something isn't something to pay attention.
A report of
saying
something is relatively useless.
Yeah.
And if you like that, then you're the same person who likes those spam emails you get from PR agencies that says, hey, we just hired so-and-so as our, junior VP of sales. Like, if you don't know that person, why would you care? Like, it doesn't matter. So we need to protect our time from time-sucking media like that.
Do you think there's a value in focus? Earlier on, you said that sometimes, so there's a width when I'm reading, there's a kind of a width, an expansive opening up that happens when you're kind of curating. I think you use it in your book, curating ideas. And then a lot of the folks here have to also focus to get like an initiative done, to get a project done, to get the ball across the goal line. When was someone need to be wider and taking in learning versus understanding a trend, for example, and then versus moving into action and focusing?
Yeah, I certainly don't mean to suggest that we don't need focused time, right? Because we definitely do. We don't need narrow-minded time, because we do. Like, we need time to do deep work, as many people call it. And the only way to do that is to ignore everything else and to truly focus. What I think the flip side of that is that we become what I call an idea collector. And what that means is that we separate the act of understanding what something means from the act of collecting it in the first place. And the best way I can describe that is with frequent flyer miles. If you think about it, when you go somewhere, like if I fly from DC, where I live, to California, I'll get, 4,000 or 5,000 frequent flyer miles. Not enough to actually use to go anywhere. So I'm collecting it. And
Sure.
Over time, when I do that trip 10 times, now I have enough to get a Caribbean vacation for my wife and I. And then I'll cash them in. So I'm collecting them as momentary rewards so that eventually I cash them in and use them for something. And I imagine if you could do that with ideas. Imagine if you could save stories, if you could save ideas, not spend too much time thinking like, what does this mean? How do I use it? No, literally I tear stuff out of magazines and I stick it in folders. Like, that's part of my process. And the reason why I do that is so that later on, when I decide to quote unquote cash them in for a big idea, now I have an archive of 4 months worth of things that I found interesting, which gives me a perspective across time that a lot of people don't get, because we're only paying attention to the news stories of today.
Yeah, I love that. And in the book, you have a video link that people can go to actually see these.
Yeah, a time-lapse video. It's called the haystack method. So
the haystack.
If you Google that haystack method, you'll find that. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, that is really cool. Do you have mentors that you've turned to through the years, Rohit?
Of course.
That you find that they're the ones that have kind of helped you with the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, I think anybody who's successful probably has a story of constant mentorship. I mean, for me, it wasn't like, oh, this one person like totally changed my trajectory of everything that I do. I don't have that type of story. I have a more fortunate story of just constantly finding people doing fascinating things and looking at them and learning from them and being open to that and being lucky enough that they said yes when I said, hey, can I ask you about this, or can I ask you about that? And by the way, one of the most underappreciated forms of mentorship that nobody really takes advantage of is paid mentorship. As in, when I started my wife and I own a book publishing company. And 5 years ago when we started, I was just an author who wanted to start a publishing company. I didn't understand the publishing industry. So I went and asked the people that I knew, who was the smartest person in publishing, or who are the smartest people in publishing.
Sure.
I found who those people are. And then I contacted them, and I didn't say, hey, will you be my mentor? I said, what is your hourly rate so I can pay you for advice? And whatever the rate was, if it was $500 an hour or whatever, I said yes. And I went and I paid them to learn from them. And that's not typically called mentorship. That's probably more consulting than anything else. But the way I experienced it was mentorship, because I had somebody who knew everything and I could ask them everything I wanted to ask them so that I could get smarter, which is basically what you do from a mentor, right? But in that case, I didn't have to beg and plead for them to become my quote unquote mentor. Yeah. I became the customer and I hired them, and that was totally worth the money. So yes, mentors, but also, if there's somebody who is charging for that, but they have the expertise that you need, pay them the money and learn from them, because it's totally worth it.
Yeah, and you can skip steps. So you could shrink that book publishing launch or that book publishing knowledge by a couple of years just by getting someone on the phone for
Yeah.
2 or 3 hours. And what's your time worth? Certainly, certainly a lot more than.
It's a form of respect too, right? Because you're saying to somebody, look, I know that you're super busy. I know everyone wants to talk to you. That's why your hourly rate is so high. But I also know that the value I'm going to get from that is totally worth it. So whatever you expect to have for that. And some people will say, okay, give it to charity or whatever, because I don't need the couple $100. It's fine. And some people will say, okay, here's my, like, sometimes what they'll say is an outrageous hourly rate because they just want you to say no. And when you say yes, it's like, oh man, this guy's really serious. He really wants this.
Well, in an accelerating world too, Rohit, I mean, it's if it is true, the world is accelerating and you have a finite time, then if you could in 1 hour hire someone to get very, very specific knowledge, that's something that's just incredibly smart.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truths that I have found in the business world when it comes to doing something like that. And several of them sort of work in your favor, which is the more experienced and knowledgeable someone is, the more in demand they will be, which means the less time they will have. And so therefore, the more able they will be to deliver value for you in a small amount of time. So when you think about getting somebody, even if they charge $1,000 an hour and you just spent 1 hour with them, if you got more from that one interaction than you would get from somebody who you would hire for a 6-month engagement who just wouldn't have any of that expertise for the same amount of money, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer. So one obvious trend coming up is a new book that you're releasing. Well, not a new book. It's the
second edition of a book that came out last year. Yep.
The Virtual Meetings and Remote Work.
Yeah, it's the second edition is called The Non-Obvious Guide to Working Remotely Without Getting Distracted, Lonely, or Bored.
I love it. I love it. Tell me, so did your first version of this come out before pre-pandemic?
So the first version, I first essentially experienced the pandemic in mid-March of 2020, just like everybody else.
Sure.
And a week after that, I started writing that book.
Okay.
And it came out in May. So it was a very fast turn. I wrote the whole thing in 6 weeks. And it featured expert advice from more than 50 professionals who were doing or had been doing remote work. And this was a topic I knew well because for the last 5 years before that, I had my own remote office. I work out of my house. I have worked with remote and led remote teams. So like this was a topic I knew really well. Like I had a lot of this stuff in my head,
sure,
both in terms of leading a remote team, but also in terms of what it takes to present virtually, all of those sorts of things, do virtual workshops, like all of those sorts of things. So the books really came out of that, and it did so well, and things continued to shift to this topic in as much of a sense as I wanted to like do a new version, incorporating a bunch of these new things that had come out. And so that's what led to the second edition, where we had a slight title change. So instead of The Non-Obvious Guide to Virtual Meetings and Remote Work, it's now The Non-Obvious Guide to Working Remotely. And then the subtitle changed and we changed the branding and some other things. So anyway, that's coming out in May of 2021. And I'm really excited about it because it's finally got all of these different pieces in there. And it's just like this ultimate guide written in very easy to understand language. The tagline for these series, the Non-Obvious Guide series, which is a series that's sort of meant to compete with the Dummies Guides.
Yeah, right.
Is that they're like having coffee with an expert. So that's the tone
of
this whole thing. And on the back, it says smart advice for smart people. Because you're not a dummy. You're not an idiot. Like you're a smart person. You just need advice on how to work more effectively. And that's what this is for. So that was the inspiration for it.
You know, it's funny. We just had 50 CIOs on a virtual meetings, my virtual innovation group last week. And I cut the meeting. I said, listen, stop telling me how great it is, how great everybody's doing working remotely. I said, because I know you all are lying right now. And I said it tongue in cheek, but it's not all roses. Like there are challenges that we got to solve for. Yeah. And so I would love, I mean, obviously the book is going to be a densely, I'm sure has a lot of great nuggets of advice, but is there a theme that you find that kind of resonates time and time again that you're like, you know what, this is from an 80-20 analysis, you know, this is kind of the core principle of the book that people should get really excited about reading?
Yeah, it sort of relates to what I think interestingly enough, we're starting to call the future normal is going to be, as opposed to the new normal. And that's actually the title of a book that I'm working on co-authoring, all about trends, that'll be out in 2022. So that's like, we're working on it now, and it's called the future normal. But that's what I've been thinking about. Like, what is the future normal of work going to be? And that's sort of what I started writing about in this guide to working remotely, because I believe what's going to happen, and this is going to create some real opportunities and interesting areas for exploration for IT professionals, right? Because what you have is people now being given the choice of how they want to work. Whereas before they had no choice either way. It was come into the office every day, and then all of a sudden overnight it was stay home every day. And now it's going to be, do this or do that. And I think what people will find is, first of all, it's predictable human behavior. We've all been stuck at home. We're desperate for, connection. And so you're going to have a honeymoon phase where people go into work every day because they're just so happy to be out of the house. And then after 3 or 4 weeks, they're going to say, sitting in traffic or sitting on the train kind of sucks. I miss being in my pajamas. I actually remember what the nice things were about working from home. And then what you'll have is a correction. And the way it will correct is people will say, well, I'll go into the office when I really have a reason to go in the office, and otherwise I'll work from home. And so what happens then? Well, we start structuring our day in very intentional ways. When I go into the office, of course, I'm going to do the meetings because I can be face-to-face. I can do the brainstorms. And when I stay home, I'm going to do less Zoom meetings. So Zoom fatigue, I think, will go away, because people will do those meetings in person. And when they work from home, they'll actually work from home and not do all these Zoom calls. The exception being, if you have a totally international distributed team, you'll still have to do that, right? But in the traditional role where people have an office place where they can go to, they'll coordinate with people. They'll go into the office some days. They'll connect with people and do those meetings in person. And then the other days they'll stay working remotely. And so the blended hybrid way of working is going to be the future for most companies. And so the question mark for IT professionals is, what do we need to put into place in order to make that as seamless as possible?
Yeah, there's a lot of enablement for sure. There's a lot of technology. Security's got to be revamped, because we don't know how, once everybody is out from behind a firewall and now they're scattered at all their homes, it changes the whole paradigm of how you do security.
Well, I think that people would probably have been dealing with for the last year, that challenge.
Oh, for sure.
It's the going back and forth that's going to be relatively new.
Yeah, it is. And then
the hot desking, the structure of the actual office. Do we have offices? Do people go to the same spot? Does everyone now need a certain type of laptop because they're going back and forth and constantly logging in? Are you going to get more IT support calls because they can't connect to the Wi-Fi because they're not used to doing it at work versus, that's the sort of stuff that is really going to be a day-to-day challenge.
Yep. Just even having printers and connections at home.
And
multiple, guys has 3 screens at work, and now he's going to have 3 screens at home. Like there's it's going to change.
Oh, you know what? You're going to get, I guarantee you, this is actually an opportunity for somebody. I don't know who can take advantage of this, but somebody will. You are going to get way more requests now from people who are used to having 2 screens at home, who say at work, I need 2 screens. I can't work with 1 screen anymore. So like that external monitor or like that, people are going to be like, I need that at work because I got so used to it at home.
Yep. And if you have 1,000 employees and need an extra $200 monitor, you're going to
have to buy those monitors, right? Whoever's making those monitors is, they better start their marketing campaign right now.
Oh my. And you have a marketing book also being released concurrently with that, right? It used to be called Small.
It's the non-obvious guide to marketing and branding without a big budget. And so that's really kind of everything I know about marketing 101. That was the book that I wrote for all of those people who have thought or said, oh, I'd love to pick his brain about marketing, but I just can't connect with all of them in person. And so this was the book with everything that you ever wanted to know about marketing, from like naming a product to building a brand, to email marketing, to search marketing, to advertising, to how to get, $20,000 ads for $1,000, to like all of that stuff is baked into that book.
Yeah, and I think the listeners on the show should grab that too, because we talk about offense innovation, and really understanding marketing doesn't mean necessarily you're taking over marketing, but you've got access to all the data. So why not read how the modern kind of next generation marketing should happen, so you can participate in supporting the leaders of the marketing department, because you probably have more likelihood of going to have your team able to support them with the data than possibly they will in their own team.
Yeah, totally.
Well, listen, Rohit, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Is there anything I missed asking you? They're like, you know what, I wish Bill would ask me. It popped in my conscious, and he forgot to bring it up, and you just want to bring it up before we go.
No, not really. If anybody's interested in any of these things, I mean, you can find out about all the guides. I also do kind of a weekly interview show. You can find out about everything at nonobvious.com. So just one word, no dashes, just nonobvious.com. You can find everything there.
Great. And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, they can. Is there a way to connect with you?
My contact details are on there.
Okay.
Happy to connect with anybody directly too. So yeah, please reach out if there's any way that I can help or make the connection for any.
Very good.
I mean, we do lots and lots of that sort of thing. So happy to do that.
We'll put that in the show notes so it's easy for people to reach out to you. Rohit, thank you so much for this, and we'll time this right around the launch of your new book series. And I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.